We are. Uh-oh. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you.
No clicker.
I'm sorry.
Perfect. Welcome, everyone, and happy Valentine's. Ollie loves you, so yeah, always remember that. The point that our beloved Frank, who is now back, so we have him and his wisdom, such as it is.
Such as it is.
Should also be noted that the creation of Czechoslovakia was in large part a creation of American support, which made it possible, including our Slovak friends, regardless of what the folks in Chicago thought. You have to bring them together. And understand that they had a friendly divorce in 92, 93. And so they have gone their separate ways ever since. So that is, in a sense, an artificial creation, as we realized. But let me also make you aware of Poland. You know, I got to tossing and turning the other night, and I thought, I wonder if everybody appreciates the history of Poland. It's really disturbing, isn't it? That you would think about Poland in the middle of the night. But I did, because it has such a rich history. Those of you who may come from or have a Polish heritage will understand that it was once a great empire. And when you think about the period we're in, of course, you realize that Woodrow Wilson had more or less promised in his 14 points the recreation of Poland. But their ancient empire, which did not end until the 18th century, which I will spare you from now, was again a sense of recreation, because Polish nationalism was by no means a new phenomenon, because the Poles had been around and had enjoyed their great day, but they were back. And why Woodrow Wilson, I'm sure he was not of Polish heritage. I can pretty well assure you of that. But I can also assure you that, shall we say, politics probably had a great deal to do with it, because you always say, why is it that Polish nationalism made the cut of the 14 points? And you have to figure that that was very, very significant in terms of American entrance into World War I and many other issues. But there you are, because we are going to Czechoslovakia and Poland, or I should say the end of them respectively. And that, of course, has to do with this all-important year, 1939, and specifically the month of March. That's makes it pretty easy to date it, doesn't it? I'm using the map because I thought it was very, very clear. I do not know if it's a German map or is it? Do you think it is? Because I wonder about the names of Norway and Sweden. Would they be?
I don't think so.
No.
Because then it would be France, would be Frankreich, you know.
Okay.
So, but they I think they use the various names of the various countries in whatever.
Ah, you're getting extra credit. Thank you. Yes. All right. No B plus for you. Yeah, you're getting an A. Yeah, you keep it up. And there's Ireland. For
Yeah.
it,
That's a-
Friends of the Irish, yeah. They give their name and there's Ulster. Yeah. So again, Polska. And we have over and over again the evidence. Now, sadly, go all the way down, and there is what we finally know as the Czech Republic nowadays. Yeah. So we understand, of course, that that is not the way it was up until the late 30s. But all of that is going to change as the German situation changes dramatically, because, of course, you'll see there is no Sudetenland, because that has already been taken by the Germans, because it had a large German population. So it was not really an area of concern. Now, as we notice the other areas, Bohemia and Moravia, you say, but what about Slovakia? And again, that may be in Slovakian, for all I know. You see that in the magenta. Yeah, how about that? I knew that. I knew that from my friend. Yeah. So there you see that area. And now, if you have a group of Czechs and Slovaks hanging out, and you're thinking a lot of hugging, and I think no. Oh, listen, yeah, you heard that little. So, and there is some Ruthenia. See that pinstripe down there? Yeah, again, artificial creation. It's all brought together, and I'm thinking Wilson, the wisdom of Woodrow Wilson, such as it was. Could you imagine all of the other issues, but having to go through all of these various sessions, debating which areas go in this and which areas, and have to drink, I bet, a lot of coffee or whatever stimulant you would need to keep you interested. I know this can be exciting for some, like those of Czech ancestry, but it could have been difficult, I suspect, to say, oh, just give them a part of Hungary, because we don't like those. Hungarians are losers, literally and figuratively. So just give them a part of, see that Ruthenia, because isn't that amazing? I mean, you think about all that geography we learn in these kinds of discussions. So we have that area, the Slovakia, and all of this, of course, had been part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? When you stop and think about that. But guess what? The Austro-Hungarians lost the war. So are we going to ask them questions, or what would you like to give up, or would you like to design the new Austrian-Hungary for us? No, I mean, they have nothing to do with it. They just told you report when we tell you and you sign it, or else. So they get what they pay for, at least in terms of what will happen now to their creation, which of course is Czechoslovakia. I think it's interesting just to realize how new it is. You know, this new kid on the block, and you think, well, how old would that be? Sounds like 20 years to me, 18 to 38, because even that, even if I said 1919 or 1920, yeah, their end, it's already beginning to form. We've already talked about Masaryk and, of course, Beneš, and more about him shortly. So Monsignor Tiso. Yes. I heard then a sound of contempt and dislike from my right side. Yes. And with good reason. He's a Catholic priest. He had risen, for those of you who know the ranks of Catholicism, he had been given the honorific Monsignor title, so he was not any small business. He wasn't small in other ways too. He was a very large man. No fasts there. He was a Slovakian politician, but not as we might think, or at least I would think, that he would probably be some wild-eyed pinko, or maybe a fascist or something of the sort. He was, in fact, sort of what you call social democrat. You might find that a bit odd, but being Slovakian and being a social democrat, and perhaps as the 20s became the 30s, he began to think about, well, we are getting a bad deal from the Czechs because they dominate and they don't give us our fair share. And he is part-time priest and part-time politician. And he is a leader of the Slovaks. And that is the way he came to have this quote unquote relationship with Germany. Because obviously the Germans don't like the Czechs. The Slovaks, I'm not sure that Hitler and the Nazis had a lot of interest in the issues facing the Slovaks, but it's more or less, if it will help us against the Czechs, fine. The Slovaks are basically ready to sign up. And we see here the results. This meeting between Hitler, and again, they never met. If he ever had an audience with Hitler, I would be very surprised. I think this is like, great to have seen you. It's been real, that sort of thing. Brush off, maybe. But yeah, this is basically it. And it made it as a photograph. And the idea is that he will make Slovakia a sort of puppet of Germany, and he will pay for it. Hangman's News, oh yeah, 1947, just read a biography of him. And a couple of years ago, too, I wanted to find out more about Slovakians. Yeah. So anytime you have questions, you just come to me. I have office hours. So you just remember that I'm available. So basically, if you don't like Czechs, just call us. We're available. We have a special office there in Berlin, and we are willing to talk to you. And you find it ironic, don't you, that as late as 1938, 39, the Germans are in touch with the Poles, because the Poles have an interest in the Czechs, but it's not a positive interest. It is, we covet land from that particular part of the world. And it's like they're saying, but you don't mean we would agree with the Germans? Yes, in a certain way. we don't like the Germans, but if they're going to let us have this cession from the Czechs, we're all in. And of course, those Hungarians. And we all love goulash and we all appreciate Budapest. Oh, beautiful. If you're going on your tours, don't miss it. It's expensive though, I think.
Pricey.
It's not days in or no. Okay. The idea though, seriously, is that the Hungarians are what we call a revisionist power. Revisionist means we want change, meaning, you know, that settlement after the Great War, that wasn't fair. And they were mean to us. And now we're going to be mean to them. The Hungarians wanted lands back that they had lost or whatever it takes. That is a situation that is just begging to be solved, and it will be a very difficult one. For example, if you were any of the neighbors of Hungary, like Romania, oh, you know they're bound at Transylvania, as in, you know, the teeth and the blood and all that. Yeah, all of that's up for grabs, and, you know, just it's an difficult situation. And of course, all of this is going to be exploited because, again, no one likes the Czechs. No one say, oh, I'm sure someone, like in the United States, maybe the Windy City. Well, yeah, there are a lot of Czechs there too. But all in all, it is a very difficult situation vis-a-vis Czechoslovakia. So I mentioned Tiso. And now I want to mention this guy who gets a very bad rap because our friend here just shook his head, and not in a positive way. It's a quite negative way. I'm going to say, I'm trying to pronounce Czech words, Hacha, Haka. Okay, Haka. And we got it from the Czech authority here, so I am ready. Haka. He was, I would say, the individual who was left with the responsibility of more or less turning the Czech part of Czechoslovakia over to the Germans. After the Sudetenland issue, Beneš resigned. You know, we're talking the very end of 1938. And we'll have more to say about that in a few moments. But he left it to this individual, Haka, who was a legal expert, a great authority in translating English into Czech and dealing with multitudinous legal issues involving Western jurisprudence. He was a professor, academic, in addition to being the state figure. In any event, with Beneš out of the picture, this individual, he's always referred to as elderly in the accounts, he was summoned to Hitler's headquarters, and I mean summoned. And according to the accounts, which differ in some details, but he was more or less browbeaten to the point that he was shown photographs of Prague being bombed and, you know, that sort of thing. So this is what's going to happen. They had the German Air Marshal Goering there. And this is like 1, 2 in the morning when all of this was done. And basically he was told, you need to agree, you need to agree. They said this man, who probably did have some age on him, he may have basically had to be given some sort of stimulation by Hitler's doctor.
Yeah, heart attack.
So one of the accounts, yeah. And this Hitler's doctor actually gave him sort of a pep shot. I'm not aware of how this worked, but however it was, the meeting went on until 4 or 5 in the morning, so I've read. And of course, all of it for the purpose of his agreement that the Germans could come into his country. And they did so, and he became a sort of, what would you say, a Czech leader supervised by the Germans.
I would say Quisling.
I know you would, but I'm not sure that's altogether fair because he had no choice. And I know, I'm sorry. And he died in a Soviet prison camp in the summer of 1945. So he paid. So, yeah, so I understand that feelings can be, but the choices that he had were extremely limited. But in any event, many people, especially I imagine people who are interested in the questions of the Jews, would note that he accepted the fact that Jews for a time were persecuted in the area under his authority. Now, he had Germans over it, mind you, but he was not exactly fighting their decisions. Meanwhile, I have this because I thought it was so interesting. Sherry, I do it, huh? I don't.
Right on the line. Just hold it a minute. We'll get the microphone to you. This time a little louder, Doctor. Quiet, folks. Quiet, please.
And the cameras will record for all time this historic event.
All right, famous, yes. It's finished. On behalf of the people of the city of New York, please accept our wholehearted welcome. And may I express to you, for the people of this city, and through you, to the people of your brave country, our greatest admiration and love. Mayor LaGuardia, I am profoundly touched by your kind reception that shows me how my country is loved here in the United States. I pass all this honor you have given me here to my country, and I hope that the relations between this country and my country will be still more and more intimate in the future. I thank you once more.
My suspicion is that he was there to try to get American support and to work the Czech American public. So I think that's fairly clear. He would end up, he and Mrs. LaGuardia would, Ms. Binet would end up in France until France fell, and then finish out in Great Britain the rest of the war. The of course, fact that Mayor LaGuardia was doing the welcoming and not President Roosevelt, I think is also interesting too, because we are aware that the United States was not ready or willing to take a major role here. So I'm figuring that if he had been officially welcomed by FDR, that would have gotten people all more excited than they needed to be, because we were not going to do it. The United States was not going to act in behalf of the Czechs at this particular point. Yeah. So Mayor LaGuardia, and I'm sure there was, as Frank pointed out, a large Czech population in New York as well as Chicago. And I'm sure they were thrilled to have him there. I just was interested, you hear so much about the LaGuardia Airport, and we know that he's one of the most famous of the New York mayors. I just thought that was very interesting that he did this sort of public relations welcoming of the Benesh duo. And notice the date, I put it up there for a reason, February. It's amazing how all of this is sort of crammed together, isn't it? Because they are there, because he must have left. Because you remember back in that day, he might have sailed. I don't know. I mean, they might have taken a liner over to New York from Europe. However they went, though, this was just the beginning of a long exile from home. I suppose he stayed in touch with the folks in Geneva, because remember, there's still the League of Nations, and he spent a lot of time there. And you could hear what wonderful English he had. Like many Europeans, unlike Americans, he was a great polyglot. I mean, I imagine his French was great. I've never heard it, but I suspect it was. And so we know then that he will remain in absentia a major figure for the Czechs. Now, his post-war career is also interesting, because after it's over, he will be the one who will initiate and further the very successful, quote unquote, effort to remove all Germans into Germany. Ethnic Germans existed all through Eastern Europe and Central Europe, but all of those in the Sudetenland and further east out, yes. Actually, friends of mine in the past were interested. The book, which I read, written back in 2012, is called Orderly and Humane, which was an ironic title because that was what was stated would be done by all ethnic Germans in terms of having them transported west. And they were taken basically by rail or whatever means into what became communist Eastern Germany and removed without any further to do. So the imagery of this Czech leader is somewhat affected by that, but that is the decision that was made in the post-war era. And we understand, of course, the times and the strong feelings, right?
Add a little more to this too. Pius the 12th, okay, was very much interested, I presume, from Monsignor Tissot.
Yes.
Seeing to it that if the Nazis, Hitler and so on, don't disturb them too much, get along with them, and he was all through the war and after, he was accused by Catholics of doing that, collaborating.
Oh, yes.
It's equivalent to a collaboration with the German Nazis.
You talking about the pontiff, Pope Pius XII? Yes, there's been quite a bit of, yeah. I mean, there was an enormous population, Catholic population, and whether someone like Monsignor Tissot really represented the papacy in this respect. But yes, the problem with those theories for me is, of course, that Pope Pius XII was very, very conservative. And that's why I mentioned to you, this fellow was more, I would go so far as to call him a social activist. I don't consider their orientation that way to be the same. But there are many. Oh God, there was a book that came out 20 years ago called Hitler's Pope. Yeah. So if you are of the anti-Pius XII school, then it is quite understandable. Yes, absolutely. That he was more or less collaborative. Oh, and folks don't like Pius XI either, because, that was back in the 20s and 30s. So again, you have they. Oh, wait, I know him. Yeah. FF. You're going to get that right on the fill in the blank. You don't even need other multiple choices. You got that one. I mention him just because he's tied into 1939. And again, on your essay, 1939, it's going to be brilliant. Be multiple paragraphs, maybe more than one blue book. Maybe one won't be enough. You'll have so much. Don't want you to be verbose, but no, seriously, the idea is, in addition to everything else that I'm talking about, this is the end of the Spanish Civil War. If you're going to get out, you better get out while the getting's good. 1939 is good. Okay, it's over. The cause of the Republic is basically finished up. We'll wait for another day. Franco did not join in the war. He remained somewhat neutral. Could I call it that? He wasn't associated, wisely for him, with Hitler and Mussolini. And Hitler attempting to negotiate him. Hitler said, I'd rather have a tooth pulled than have to deal with Franco, because, it's like my way or the highway, or all of the cliches we think of dealing with someone who's difficult. So Franco just stayed out, because clearly, despite the non-intervention agreement, the French and the British had stayed neutral, but the Germans and Italians had assisted Franco. So I guess they were thinking that the Spanish would be sympathetic to their cause, but maybe Franco knew something that everyone else didn't. In any event, he made it through the war without being overthrown, and made it, of course, till 1975. Important year for some of us. I could not believe it when I picked up the paper that day. I mean, it's like, what? He's dead? I just, it's like he got on and on all my life, and I'd never imagined that I don't know whether I thought he was immortal or what, but he just seemed to be, and was, very, very long-lived and maintaining his authority. But I'm going to tell you something. When it was gone, it was really gone. You would not find a trace of Franco now. And if you go to Madrid and you're hanging out and say, how do y'all feel about Franco? I wouldn't do that. I would just keep my little mouth shut. I would just look it up. They're good books for you to read, and I can recommend it, but don't do that, okay? As far as the Spanish reputation, I think I talked to you about this, Frank. It's as if the Spanish were sort of isolated until the 1950s, more or less shunned, you can almost say, a pariah country. It's sort of like, but not in Switzerland. We love the Swiss, you know, the chocolate, the watches, and all the rest. But the Alps, but yeah, no. But the Spanish, not so much. And so suddenly in the 1950s, the Eisenhower administration, United Nations, basically began to accept Franco. Maybe it was the Cold War, maybe it was a realistic sense that this is too large and important a country just to be ignored. Whatever it was, suddenly Franco became important. I don't mean we accepting your application for NATO membership. No. But Eisenhower flew to Spain. This is 1959. And they shook hands and Buenos Dias and all the rest. But it never took the more or less major steps that has happened after Franco. Like, I believe it was 1982 when Spain joined NATO and so forth and so on. Again, you would have no idea that Franco was even there. I mean, he has been so obliterated in Spanish memory, except in a very, very negative way. I mean, there may be some cult of Franco, but it's got to be really, really underground, at least I would think, even though Spain is a democracy. Now, here is an interesting person. Okay. King Zog. You say, wow, what a name. What a uniform. I wonder, did you get it for those shops, you know, 76 trombones? Don't you think you could do this? Maybe your Glee Club could sing it or something.
I
And
can
he
sing
could,
it if you like.
and he, oh, no, not you. I don't, but yes, but you, how you like that uniform? You say, gee, do you think that was his dad's? No, because my dad wasn't king. Yeah, he was the one and only King Zog of Albania. Now, a lot of people won't know this, so bring that up at a party. You'll be a big hit because a lot of people don't know this. You can go like, yeah, I learned it at Ollie. So remember that it's all included in your tuition. So yeah, King Zog. And why do we care about King Zog? Well, every day he smoked 200 cigarettes a day. You said that's a lot of cigarettes. He had a record. I mean, this is like, they didn't know anyone who smoked that many. And remember, they didn't do filters back then. So we're talking some serious weed smoking. I mean, that takes a lot of time. he's got cigarettes going a lot of the time. I mean, I've seen, you know, you hear about chain smokers. This is nothing compared to Zog. Zog was serious. I mean, you would have to do it a lot. You could take naps because you say, oh my God, I won't be able to keep up with my record from last year. He lived into the, I think 1961. So, he got by. As far as Zog is concerned, he took the name because it was short for his real name. I always think about who can I compare him to, and do you know what I came up with? Again, while I was in bed and woke up. I know it's very disturbing. Why can't I have a normal sheep dream or, you know, lambs or something? No, have to dream about kings. And who? Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. Yeah. And you know why? Because he was just a politician. In 1848, he was elected president of France. And he got so tired of campaigns, and who can blame him, that he had himself declared president for life. And then he had himself declared Napoleon III, emperor. And you say, no more campaigns, no more elections. That worked for him. That is to say, Emperor Napoleon III. Now, France is France and Albania is Albania. So my comparison only works to a limited extent. But the idea of just declaring yourself is what's got me. And then getting those uniforms, those outfits. Gilbert and Sullivan would be jealous. Yes. Yes. And those fittings, I'm thinking like you in between drags, you would have to get those fittings. Yeah, I mean, it does kind of crack you up. Now, if it is true that Mussolini was kind of jealous of Hitler, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But the idea that he would actually say, every time Hitler takes a country, he calls me, and then I'm going to take somebody. But I think the relationship between Italy and Albania had been one of, oh, what is that old song? It's just a matter of time. Yeah, I mean, remember Ethiopia? The economic interests of Italy in Albania were very, very significant. Albania is not exactly an economic powerhouse, right? To be blunt. And the Italians had more or less inundated it as their way of trying to forestall Yugoslavia. Remember, Yugoslavia is right north of Albania. And that Adriatic Sea area, if you are familiar with what I'm talking, I think the Italians had some method to what they were trying to do. And believe me, this would not be a major campaign because King Zog didn't have the wherewithal to withstand them. I mean, he was willing to be a junior buddy of Mussolini. I mean, yeah, you know, it's not like, hey, pal, we can be really good friends. No, I mean, he was willing to do the subservient because, you know, Mussolini is Il Duce, the boss. And it just didn't work for him because I think Mussolini decided, why just make an alliance with him when you could just throw him out and take over Albania? So That's exactly what he's going to do. And this is going to happen in the time we've gotten to love, 1939. And as a matter of fact, Holy Week, very significantly. Okay, let's see if I can do it right now. Do I just press the button?
Just click the button.
Good Friday morning along the coast of Albania. Good Friday morning when the world pauses in its labors to remember the Prince of Peace. But today in the tiny kingdom on the Adriatic, people look out across their harbors down the muzzles of Italian guns, look into the faces of Italian soldiers, look up to masses of Italian warplanes, read leaflets in their own language, calling upon them to surrender immediately or be massacred from the air. Some reports say the Albanians resisted the invaders, but what can a nation do outnumbered 40-1? So into the capital Tirana rides the Italian army, and soon a free assembly of Albanians offers the crown to King Victor Emmanuel. And when all the snipers have been combed out, Count Chano struts in to take charge. He takes a bow from the balcony, welcomed by the entire population.
I am wondering how sincere that welcome was, but the idea, of course, did you hear that Victor Emmanuel now became the replacement for Zog? And you think, but what about Mussolini? Sorry, you can't be king. You can't be emperor. You can do all this in my name. And does that hurt Mussolini? I don't know. I think it did. I mean, if you have to have a meeting with Hitler, and Hitler says, gosh, I don't have kings and emperors where I come from. So, you know, when I take over a country, I'm the ruler. No, I don't. I have to say, and of course, Mussolini, you know how a child would, you know, that sort of like be bratty. Yes, as far as PR is concerned, Albania is not going to be on the top of the list of major concerns. I'm sure, as our British announcer would have it, Holy Week seemed to be a terrible time to have a military campaign. I can assure you it was a short one, and Zog headed out with the family, had a very interesting family. The Queen was, in fact, half American. I found her fascinating. Geraldine was her name. And of course, they lived a nice life in exile. I think she didn't die until 2002. Yeah, wow. Lived a long, long time. And the son, their son, he lived to 2011. He's always had hopes of making a return. You know, it's like, you know, I was Zog's boy. And then in the big rally, you know, and the people in Tirana, Albania would keep going, go Big Z, you know, and it's, you know, we all want to come back. What can I say? But now, if you want to take a trip to Albania, maybe you haven't planned this yet, but I have some travel tips, because in downtown Tirana, and I want you to get a photograph for me. That's all I ask. Not buy stuff, just a photograph and send it to me. Because there is King Zog Street. Yeah, and I'm excited about that. Because believe you me, I didn't know about King Zog when I was growing up. No, I had to wait until I know. I've been deprived all those years growing up because I just thought about it. It was some eccentric communist country. That's ugly, isn't it? I mean, but they weren't allied with the Soviet Union. It was a very strange situation. They were a Chinese friend. And you thinking, wow, That must have been a wild and crazy dictator in Tirana, Albania. Yes, it was. So, but time kept, I know it. He was like an ally in Albania, and it was like Stalin, would send him chocolates or flowers and say, I love you, comrade. And he just kept getting these rejection. It hurts, when you try so hard. But we want Albania. But again, when you're on those streets of Tirana, remember me, okay? King Zog Square. I was fascinated. Talk about forgive and forget. You won't find Francisco Franco Avenue in Madrid. So you see how those nice Albanians, they do seem to have come around. In any event, I'm not sure how long the Italians really had Albania, because remember, Italy's not going to be an ally of Germany throughout World War II because they lose and lose badly. Certainly by late 1943, 44, yeah. Albania is no more as far as the Italians are concerned. So it will definitely change. Believe you me. And again, from the map, we always think about Albania and where that is in respect to the Italians. And I want that to be very clear and very important because the economic interest, and probably, well, not probably, I'm sure that it just infuriated Yugoslavia to have the Italians take that because that whole area was so important. And again, those of you World War II people will know about the significance of all of this for the war itself. But I'm just concerned for probably Mussolini made a, remember that when you made person-to-person calls, remember those days? Yeah, he probably made a person-to-person call to Germany. Said, yeah, I took a country yesterday. What do you think about that? He's going, oh, that's really great. Yeah, that Albania, you must be, that's something, man. You really, man, that ought to go down in the annals of military skill. Yeah, I'm sure. But anyway, so that is that particular area, and that is the success for Italy. Meanwhile, guess who did not come for the big deal? Well, of course, it's Mussolini. It's called the Pact of Steel. Apparently, Hitler and some of his advisors wanted to call it the Pact of Blood. I know, but they decided that was a bit much. So they let it go at the Pact of Steel. And you see China, I don't think he liked Hitler, but again, and you see Goering, the Air Force man who's scared for, let's see, Haka. Okay. So you see him over there with all of his medals. So they're going to sign this. And you notice it says the enhancement of the Axis, meaning we're just trying to make it stronger. And why do they make it stronger? Well, from the point of view of Mussolini, I can understand you wanting to associate yourself with the resources of Germany. From the German perspective, I'm sure I do not know. That will be one of the
power in the Mediterranean.
Well, that's one theory, but in any event, they do sign it, and it's called the Pact of Steel. and it will be added to other agreements. Interesting, Article 3, I didn't bother with the rest, but again, we're still in 1939. Now we've moved up to May, but I wanted you to read this particular part. This is the third article, and it's called the most overtly aggressive treaty in history. That's quite a bit to say about something, but I think if you look at it, now it says, it starts out, he said, against the wishes and hopes of the contracting parties. Oh, I know you could just see me carrying two doves, right? And then you go, that one of them becomes involved in military complications. Well, what does that mean? Complications. Yeah, well, I think we exactly understand that it has nothing to do with I'm defending myself. I have a run-in with you. But you know what you're going to do? You'll be right there. Step to its side as an ally, support it with its military might on land, at sea, and in the air. Woo. So let's think about that. Is that really going to happen in 1939, 1940? No, but it sounds good. Have you ever thought about that? You see any Italians in Poland? Well, not right off. But that is the idea. If this had been following, you know, this could be like a James Taylor song, couldn't it? I mean, it's, where you go, I will follow. Carole King, remember that? Yeah, that's that. You got a friend? All of that. But that is not exactly the way it happens. But it sounds great. I mean, I don't know who wrote this. I'm sure Hitler didn't. Maybe Count China, whoever. But I just wanted to share that with you in this pact of steel. And this is not to be confused with the so-called anti-Comintern pact, because we'll come back to that. But this is separate and apart from this, because this particular pact of steel is between these two. And it's all, you know, and you just think this whole, you're there for me and I really care about it. I'm not so sure about that, and I'm not sure that in the event that it actually is true. But it appeared that despite all the efforts, remember poor Neville Chamberlain at the opera? Remember that? Sitting through that long production of Falstaff did no good, because obviously, you know, this whole business of the British going to Rome to put up with Mussolini and Canciano, you know, all of that was just to prevent this. So when Mussolini decided to do this, that was, you might say, a major defeat for the British, not to mention the French. And diplomatically speaking, there would be other problems, of course, not to mention the Czechs' dismay. This individual can be one of great interest. Joseph Beck, an individual who would actually die in prison, think about 44, was a Polish leader and an associate of Pilsudski, younger protege, you might say, what we call it, mentored by Pilsudski. He had lots and lots of issues because after the death of Pilsudski in the 1930s, Colonel Beck, and I emphasize that even though he was wearing civilian clothes, he was military, and he was the leader of a coup that more or less controlled the Polish government. But he is regarded as the major figure in Polish decision-making in the future. A future that seemed very grim indeed when they thought about what might happen now. Remember, this is 1939, as I've said repeatedly. They wanted, understandably, to be anti-Soviet. The only way the Soviets were ever able to bring the Poles down, of course, was through making them ruled by communists, right? Because we all remember the communist rule of Poland through the Cold War. In fact, Colonel Beck and his fellow leaders of the Polish government were determinedly anti-Russian. As if you needed any reminding, the Poles and Russians had been fighting. You remember? I mean, like, if there's a year, let's have a war. It's amazing, isn't it, when you stop and think about how many conflicts went on between the Russians and the Poles during those years. You think after the Great War, everybody would go, peace is at hand. I love you, Pole, not as much as I love you, Ruski, you know. But that didn't happen. It was out and out, this land, and then it's like the cheer, you know, push them back, way back. And you're going to hear that, and between the Soviets and the Poles. So the idea that the Poles could ever, shall we say, develop a warm, caring relationship with the Soviet Union seems unlikely. That's why many of us during the Cold War found, oh God, his name just came back to me. It was Gomulka. He was the Soviet, he was a Soviet puppet in Poland. Now, how I remember that, I do not know. It's like it just suddenly darted in. That is an individual. It will not be on the final, okay? You do not have to know that. But he was, some of these, these figures that were so important during the Cold War, not that important because he was like a yawman to the Soviets. In any event, Colonel Beck there, he was definitely not pro-German, but being more anti-Soviet than anti-German. And remember, if you are a Polish leader, it's like you're between the devil and the deep blue sea. No more cliches. I'm going to control myself. But you get the idea that you are between these two terrible people. And he's thinking, with you Germans, we do have that non-aggression pact, and we value that. We appreciate you. We really do. And the Germans, of course, will say, well, thank you, Danke. We appreciate you too. And so we can hang out times. And we can also hang out because of those blankety blank checks. No offense. But do you not like the checks? No. Well, we don't either. No. Let's all get together then.
Take a piece.
Yes. And he says, well, if you wouldn't mind, we would like some. And, it's very odd when you think about it, but it's not as if that makes them friends so much as they simply want to feed on what had been Czechoslovakia. But then it's hardly that the Poles are alone for the feed. I mean, the Czech feed, because let's face it, the Hungarians want some, the Slovaks want some. I mean, lots of folks want some. So, yep, once the Germans get their part, then everybody comes in for their share. And Beck is definitely no different, as you know.
We welcome Colonel Beck, the Foreign Minister of Poland, surely one of the most important visitors to London for many years. For it was after negotiations with the Colonel that Mr. Chamberlain gave his momentous pledge to Poland, serving notice on the world that expansion through aggression and the threat of force must cease. So the nation which Colonel Beck represents becomes our partner in an axis which stretches across Europe from west to east, an axis for the maintenance of peace and freedom.
Boy, they can really stir it up for those movie audiences, I guess. Cinema. Yeah, because this was probably in the summer of 1939, and I thought you'd be interested to see Beck in reality as just opposed to that photographic portrait, seeing him come out of the office. If he looked like the cat that had the canary, I'm thinking he was pretty darn excited, because he flew from Warsaw to London, and while in London, he was talking up big with Chamberlain, Lord Halifax, the foreign minister, and saying, we're very concerned about the Germans. And the British, Neville Chamberlain, remember him, was saying in effect, we are too. And you know what we want to do? We want to give you a guarantee. We never got around to helping those Czechs. They were nice, but they're gone. We can't go back. But you Poles, we really care a lot about you. So in effect, the reason that Colonel Beck is so happy is because he's going to get from the British and the French, simply because the British go first, he's going to get a guarantee. If you're attacked, we will come in there. Because frankly, Neville Chamberlain, who is not going to live much longer, due to health conditions, his health, is going in effect to be very, very disappointed that his efforts to preserve peace had failed, clearly. Now think about earlier 1939. And remember, it was just in the fall of 1938 they'd had the Munich conference. And in November, of course, one of the most horrible outbreaks of anti-Semitic violence. So as far as Chamberlain was concerned, and he was man enough to admit it, appeasement has failed. So now we are more concerned with stopping any threat to peace. It didn't help the Czechs, but it was going to help the Poles, or so they thought. The idea being that we will stand up for you if you are threatened. Now, if you're saying, but what about our friends in Moscow? They were not involved. And you can understand why. We think that Churchill disliked communists, Chamberlain disliked them even more. He really did not have any confidence in the Soviet Union. And the idea that the Poles would say, come on in. We've decided we really love you, Soviet Union. That seems improbable, to say the least. So leaving them alone. And we just saw Colonel Beck with his agreement. Now, the smile does not spell out any kind of specifics, does it? It's ambiguous, I think, but we know afterwards that he's ready to fly on to Warsaw because he's got that commitment. And people were very surprised by it because, of course, we know that Chamberlain had been the appeasement man and all the rest of it. But not now. It's over. And yet we're still long from the start of the war. If I may, I'll just stop now and we'll go back to this coming next week, 1939. Thank y'all very much. Thank you.